All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I know that some people are still coming into the room, but in the interest of wanting to stick on schedule, we're going to go ahead and get started with this evening's program. Welcome to this week's special installment of our Florida Talks at Home series, Let's Talk About Water. My name is Keith Simmons. I'm the Communications Director at Florida Humanities, and I'm just going to have a little bit of a brief introduction before we get to our program this evening with our very special guests, Carol Mickett and Robert Stackhouse. Florida Humanities is hosting this week-long series of programs focusing on various aspects of water. Now, this is in lead up to the launch of Waterways. It's a Smithsonian Museum on Main Street exhibition that's traveling the state of Florida starting this month and going through September of 2022. And with its impassioned focus on local history, in education and community redevelopment, Museum on Main Street is one of the Smithsonian's most inspirational and enduring outreach programs. The Waterways Exhibition in particular explores the endless motion of water, from its effects on our landscape, settlement, and migration, to its impacts on culture and spirituality. Now, as I mentioned, the tour is going to launch this Saturday on June 26th at the Citrus County Historical Society in Inverness. And it's going to tour from this month, June 2021, until September of 2022. To see the full schedule and for more information on Waterways, you can visit floridahumanities.org/moms. And we're grateful to Palette One and to the law firm of Hahn, Lozier, and Park for their generous support of this statewide exhibition. And don't forget, you can see more about moms-related programs that we're doing or any other programs that are sponsored by Florida Humanities by visiting floridahumanities.org/events. At the end of tonight's presentation, you will receive a short feedback survey in your email. We would greatly appreciate you taking a minute to fill it out for us. Let us know how we did, ways that we can improve next time, and other topics that you might be curious to hear about in the future. If you have any questions during tonight's presentation, you can add them using the chat function or the Q&A function of Zoom. And by the way, your support is essential in terms of making these programs a possibility. If you enjoyed tonight's program, we encourage you to visit floridahumanities.org/support and consider contributing to our organization to make programs like this possible in the future. And so again, we welcome tonight Carol Mickett and Robert Stackhouse, a team of collaborative artists who have been working together for more than 2 decades. Carol has a PhD in philosophy from the University of Minnesota, which provides a framework for analyzing the concepts conveyed in their work. Robert, who finds the materials that they typically use, has an honorary doctorate from the University of South Florida and an MA from the University of Maryland. The result of their work, which we're going to get a glimpse of tonight, is a lifetime of collaboration of art through various mediums and installations. And with that, I'd like to give a warm welcome to our guests, Carol and Robert.
Hello, I'm Carol Mickett.
And I'm Robert Stackhouse.
And I am going to share our screen. So welcome to Expanding Waters, our talk, which is part of the Florida Humanities series, Let's Talk About Water.
So for over 20 years, Carol and I have been collaboratively exploring ways to depict water through mapping, through the effects it has on us and the effects we have on it and the dynamics of the water itself.
In 2004, we were commissioned by the Indianapolis Arts Center to put a sculpture in the Michael Graves Arts Park. We were indeed the first sculpture to be put in this park, and there wasn't really a park yet. They were working and designing and building the park while we were making the sculpture. What you see here is a map of, the sculpture. So these near the road are standing stones, and down near the White River, which is down here, is a boat-like deck. And if you follow the center of that deck all the way down to the standing stones, it would fit in there.
So it's carved out of 65 tons of Indiana limestone. And these standing stones are related in form to the chimney on the Michael Graves Arts Center. It's carved by Carol and myself, by a professional stone carver from Senegal and an art student who was a stone carver, plus 45 citizens of the Indianapolis area who volunteered to carve with us on this. So everybody had to learn how to carve stone, and what we ended up with was a surface of various individuals' ways of chipping away at the stone. So each person can come and identify where they worked. I mean, you can look at some of the stones. Some of it looks smoother than others. Some people didn't have a very strong hand. Some people did. So what it did is it became a community event, and it has lasted that way now, so people can revisit it.
And what it did was it made this sculpture part of their community, and it was their sculpture, not only ours. So here is the deck-like structure down near the White River. And you can see the White River is pretty high, it's pretty turbulent. And in the spring, when the thaw comes, the river actually floods over the sculpture. And initially, we wanted to put the standing stones down here. So when it did flood, you just see the standing stones sticking out. But the engineer nixed it because he was afraid that the standing stones would sink into the ground. And here you can see the deck closer up. And you can see how, if you follow the point, it's pointing towards the chimney, which is really pointing to the standing stones. And in this deck, we carved a map of the White River, and right about here is where the this site would be.
So a point of process here, we talked about the carving of it. These were about 7 stones weighing 5 to 7 tons apiece, and they were irregularly shaped. And Carol, in order to move the stones, which we could not do readily, she was able to make a paper pattern of each stone. She traced the stones in paper. We were able to manipulate the paper to a point where each stone could be close to being fitted together, so then we could make the proper adjustments to fit it together. So it looked like one fluid deck.
And what's interesting about this is that when I was young, in junior high school and in high school and college, I made clothes. So that experience and knowledge of how to use a pattern was very useful, and was very useful in making a stone sculpture.
Well, and while we were carving this river onto this structure, Carol and a recent architectural graduate from Ball State University, who was a volunteer and then we hired to work with us, they were discussing Heraclitus, and the concept was you cannot step into the same river twice, is the way I heard it. And I sort of looked up and said, wow, what a great concept. An artist could spend a lifetime trying to make that.
So Heraclitus was a 6th century, early 5th century BC pre-Socratic philosopher. That means he lived before Socrates. And the translation here, you would not step twice into the same river, is how Aristotle reported it. Of course, he reported in ancient Greek, not in English. He reported that this is what Heraclitus had said. So the pre-Socratic philosophers were known to be finding the basic stuff of the world, of our life, of all of us. And Heraclitus thought it was change. He often called it flux. So in 2008, we were commissioned by the St. Pete Arts Center, now what's called the Morian Arts Center, to do a big show in 6, 7 galleries. And the show was called Waves of Meaning. And we made an installation called In the Blue, which was a 3-dimensional representation of the Gulf of Mexico. And what you would do is you would enter it and you could walk around. And you'll see when we show you images, it's different temperaments of the Gulf. But when you come out, you could enter it again, but you couldn't enter it twice because you were already have already been in it. So you couldn't enter it and see it anew. You were a different person. So you can't enter a sculpture twice.
So it's like the same place, different time in a way. You know, your experience is different. You've grown, you've moved on, and yet here they are. So when you enter into the space, you see a blue painted wood and blue lights and an A-frame that sort of gives you a path to walk through. On either side are hanging strips of wood that move a little bit when you walk through. It gives you the sense that the water is sort of beginning to become a little turbulent. As you walk into the next room, you see this.
This room is called Crest, and it's the turbulent water. It's going crazy, like in a storm. And this room was a favorite of many people, and it's been photographed and reproduced a lot. Indeed, the photograph of it is actually a couple times in the art history book, Gateway to Art, which we have discovered is used in many of the colleges and universities in the Tampa Bay area. And I assume because here it's probably used in Florida and probably throughout the United States. So that's something we are very proud of.
Something that people maybe aren't aware of when they see a show like this is we only had a week to put it up. So we had different kind of gangs working on it. Carol had a gang with her on this particular room as I was working another room. And she had a number of volunteers plus a 7-year-old that was really adept at getting inside it. And you could slide a piece of wood into it and he could help situate. So they were involved, and they got so involved, it was like, when are they going to stop? You know, and they just kept adding more and more and more. And I think the next room is almost a reaction to that.
It's called Calm.
And this is the basic architectural structure of the whole 4 rooms. It's this kind of a frame that's got an A-frame and it goes from wall to wall. We were not allowed to attach anything to the floor, so it all had to be attached to the wall. And the calm is like just a clear blue. There's no movement in the water, and it's just one of those pristine kind of things.
Robert and I, of course, went to this exhibition many, many times when it was up. It was up for a number of months. And this actually became my favorite room. I just really liked being in this calm.
Well, you walk into the next room and, you know, sort of after the calm, the waters gather up again and they start flowing in a direction. This particular room is called Channel. And there's movement on the floor, there's movement mid-level, there's movement on top of the frame, and it's lit in such a way that the shadows themselves add to the whole effect. And as you walk through it, the shadows move a little bit and do different things. So you come out of this channel and you're in an open spot and you could go back in again. But as Carol says, you can't step into the same sculpture twice.
In 2013, we were commissioned by Bob Clark of Clayco, he's the CEO of Clayco, to design art for his new building that he was designing and going to construct in downtown Richmond, Virginia, in their financial district. So we were brought on before the building was even fully designed, and we were at the first shoveling of this site. And we created a sculpture, an installation in 3 parts. It's called Gateway Trio, and you'll see River Song, which is a mosaic, Clear Passage, which is a sculpture, and Capital Flow, which were flow lines embedded in the floor and outside.
Now this is a 15-foot tall by 72-foot long mosaic. We made it in Meyer of Munich in Munich, Germany, and it took 19 mosaicists about 6 months to complete this. We went over there 4 different times and oversaw the building of this. It's made up of 5 sections, but they complete a single image. And as you walk into the lobby of the elevator lobby, it's like walking into the river. You're immersing yourself into it. The image is depicting the Whitewater Rapids in the middle of downtown Richmond, Virginia. And it was an impediment to going further west.
So when ships were on the Atlantic and came up the James River, which many did, they came up further to these rapids. And so they couldn't go any further. So what they did was they offloaded their ships and no doubt started a trading post and then a village and then a bigger community. And eventually it's become Richmond, Virginia, the capital of Virginia. This is a common way for communities and towns and cities to be formed throughout the world. You come up and you can't go any further. Water is really significant in shaping the way we live. So here's a close-up of the mosaic. So you can see how turbulent the water is and how incredible these mosaic artists were at Meyer Munich that they could create this. We worked with them carefully. We drew pictures of how the water was to move, but they were able to transport it into mosaic. And they really liked it because this was the most gestural mosaic they had ever done. And we called it River Song because we wanted to hear the water whoosh, whoosh. And I think you can see that and hear it.
So Carol mentioned doing the drawings. We had to draw a 1 inch equals 1 foot scale drawing for each wall. And the architects kept changing the shape of the wall. So we had to keep redrawing this.
And one of the things that was really interesting that we discovered was because the ships couldn't go further, they wanted to go further because they wanted to go west and trade. George Washington did the survey and eventually as president allowed this canal to be made that would continue west. And it was the first canal in the United States.
So the sculpture that you see is called Clear Passage. And it's 43 foot long, it's 14 foot wide and 16 foot tall. It has two benches in the middle of it for people to sit on and to walk. You can walk through it. It's made out of stainless steel and 72 pieces of industrial glass. It's boat shaped because, as the aforementioned canal that Carol was talking about, this is on the west end of what once was the turn basin for that canal. There are other buildings on this site of the turn basin, but this is one where we're commemorating the bateaus, which were only could go one direction. They had to come into the turn basin so they could turn around and go back west if they were coming from the west. So they could unload their goods or load up their goods to carry out to the west. The canal was never completed, by the way, but it was the first canal ever attempted in the US. Now this is Clear Passage is you can walk into it, but you can see out through it. It refracts and reflects. And it's a little bit like when you're inside of it, being inside the mist of the rapids themselves.
One of the things when you're building art like this in a public space, you have to be thoughtful about safety. So this is one of the reasons why there were entrances on both ends and why we had glass. So no one could be trapped in it. Everyone had free passage. Now, the other thing to see is the flow lines embedded in the floor. So if you followed them out following this person out the door, they would continue. They're in the plaza outside and they go to the curb. And if you continued them for a couple blocks, you'd end up at the rapids of the James River. And if you come the other way and go out that door, and they're embedded in the plaza up to the curb, and if you followed them another couple blocks, you'd end up at the Capitol building of Virginia, which happened to be designed and oversaw in the construction by Thomas Jefferson. Richmond and Virginia was very rich with families that founded the United States of America. So
this brings us up to date. We're talking now about our show Expanding Waters, which is at the Galleries of Creative Pinellas in Largo, Florida. We have this show because Carol and I are the 2020 recipients of the Creative Pinellas Art Laureates. And this show is a product of that, and it's been up for 3.5 months. So in that vein, art is a great way to create a story and engage people in conversation because art makes the invisible visible. Expanding Waters focuses on climate change, our warming waters, and ways to bring our world back into balance. Those of us who live in Florida are well aware of the high tides, our storms and hurricanes intensifying, and the increase of our waters and atmospheric warming. The worsening of asthma, the increase of insurance premiums, our need of more and earlier air conditioning, blah, 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 and the flooding of all our streets. And our list could go on. Our survival and the world's survival depends upon reducing the level of heat in the world. Let's be the change.
So when we came back from Indianapolis, so that's in 2004, late 2004, the two hurricanes, Charlie and Francis, had just happened. Charles and Francis were my parents' names, so it was sort of funny. We came back, and I'm sure a lot of you are like me. If there's something you don't like, you try to fix it. So I knew that warming waters, when they were hot, intensified hurricanes. So I was like, well, let's try to cool the waters off so we don't have intense hurricanes. And now with the waters getting warm, this is a big issue. So we thought, well, if we want to have cooler water, what do? We put ice in it. So we use the ice cube tray. Some of you may remember this type of ice cube tray from when you were young. And here you see a map of Tampa Bay and the boats taking ice cubes out, spewing them into the water. And here's some fish who are thankful that the water is getting cooler. But there's issues here, and these are thought experiments. So the question and what they're asking you to do is think it through. What are the consequences of doing this? Well, you see that these barges have smoke coming out of them. Well, that's putting CO2 into the air. And CO2, of course, traps the heat. So that's not going to help us or the waters. You also have to think, well, how do we make the ice cubes? If you made them in a freezer, or that freezers and refrigerators put out lots of heat. So that wouldn't be a very good solution. Perhaps we could use solar to power the boats and to make the ice. We also can't make ice from tap water because tap water, if you put that much ice in the waters, would expand the waters. So you'd have to somehow freeze the salt water, which of course takes longer. I know because I've done it in my freezer. And you also have to think about these fish. How would putting ice in the water affect the ecosystem of the ocean?
So here's that ice cube tray from from our childhood, made out of aluminum. Who wants to drink ice made from aluminum? But anyway, they're really neat machines because you squeeze that lever and the ice pops out, unlike the plastic things we have today. So we were enamored with the shape and the intricacy of this kind of an object. This is a painting called Mitigation Icon. And it's bringing, again, the past up to the present. So we're trying to step in that river again, but it's different. And why we're using with this ice cube tray is we brought it up. We didn't know we were going to do this. We didn't plan on it, but it's really sort of become the star of the show. It represents all ways to mitigate our warming waters.
So art, as Robert said earlier, can create a conversation and can allow people to enter into talking about issues of warming the water and thinking about ways of solutions. But we need science. We need people who are really exploring this and have worked on this for their lives. So in this show, we had conversations with scientists and science panels in order to address this issue and think about how we can do something about it. So we had for Florida Climate Week a conversation with Dr. Jyotika Vermani, who's the executive director of the Schmidt Ocean Institute, which as scientists for free go out in the research vessel around the world and do research on the oceans. We had a panel on what is climate change and sea level rise. Well, we needed this because we can't do anything about an issue unless we know what the issue is and know a lot of the details. So we had scientists from USF, University of South Florida Marine College, scientists from the United States Geological Survey. We had people talk about electric cars, about solar energy, and about trees and plants as solutions for what we can do to help mitigate climate change. And we also had administrators because they can set policy. And we found out that more and more communities are looking at how to form a green community. And they're bringing on creating sustainability departments and having sustainability managers who can help create communities that are sustainable.
So an interesting point of all that, though, is when Carol was putting together these panels, all the panels really wanted this to have an art context, understanding the art context. So we're back to talking about art now. So these is the main gallery in the galleries of Creative Pinellas. And it's a large installation consisting of a 12-foot aluminum ring and 6 13-foot tall paper hanging from rods in the ceiling and a 11-foot acrylic painting of the moon. And what this installation does is it shows the light emanating from the moon. And why the moon? Well, the moon is one of our major water influencers. It makes the tide go back and forth. And so it has a major impact in it. This is how we have sort of gone ways of depicting water and how it affects us and how we affect it. So the moon is very much a influencer of our waters. And the paper and the ring represent the light coming out of the moon as we see it. So if you're in the sculpture and you're sort of exploring around, which is what you're meant to do, you can walk out into the center of it, and it focuses on a wall with some paintings, and the focus is on our troubled waters.
So when we look here from the moon through the ring, we see the triptych. And the triptych has a big painting with the water on fire. Now, the water's probably not on fire yet, Of course, if there's an oil spill like there was in the Gulf, the water would be on fire. But it's to say, look, our waters are getting very warm and we are in trouble. And the whale on the right-hand side, this is a consequence of the warm waters. It's distressed. It's in the red. It's asking for help. It's asking to flee. And then on the right is our trusty ice cube tray. As many have said, it looks like a lifeboat, and it's sailing off to get help, to say, here, we're going to bring back ways of mitigating this. And we know that lots of people are working on this issue. Now, when we revealed this again, we see that there are two paintings on the opposite wall. And here's one of them. It's called Memory of Water. It's blue, it's cool, it's luscious. You just want to be in that water. Well, this is what we want. We just don't want it to be a memory of water. We want it to be the way water really is. So it takes many voices. This is why we had the scientists there. And we also invited performing artists and literary people to put their voice in about the issue of climate change.
So the sculpture was designed for performance. We designed it on purpose to have theater in it and have dance in it, and for them to use it not as merely a backdrop, but to interact with it so that the whole installation became a partner.
And here we see Rachel, brilliant dancer, interacting with one of the paintings called The Idea of Water. She becomes part of that painting. And here is Romeo and Juliet in our Shakespeare production, which had snippets from different Shakespeare plays that were all about the environment. And here Romeo and Juliet are speaking about the light of the moon and searching for each other. In addition, we did a writing workshop, and that people were asked to go and look in the show and choose an image and come and write about it. It was done by Keep St. Pete Lit. And I participated in this. I wrote a story about, you'll see, 3 mangrove trees. And people wrote screenplays, they wrote little memoirs, they wrote poems. It was actually quite fascinating how the different voices did very different approaches to this work.
So what can we do? How about plant a tree? Trees are natural mitigator of climate change. They remove heat-trapping CO2 from the atmosphere and release oxygen. The mangrove, the great CO2 absorber, reinforces our shorelines and provides a natural soft seawall to lessen the impact from hurricanes. They also provide a natural habitat for fish and shellfish. Large trees such as the live oak, in addition to absorbing CO2, also provide shade, and their leaves and branches cleanse the air.
So here are 2 paintings, the mangrove and the live oak. They're meant to be honorific. They're painted on a background of deep green, and the trees are painted in a sparkly gold. They're almost like religious paintings of saints with the gold on a dark background. And they're meant to be honored because these 2 trees, which are ubiquitous in Florida, collect CO2 in great amounts. Indeed, a mangrove forest will collect more CO2 than the rainforest. They're trees that we are to honor. It's no excuse to cut them down. Indeed, it's illegal to cut a mangrove down because they provide so much to us. Plant a tree.
So what's better than an icon of a mangrove? How about a lot of them? And so this painting is 3 carbon catchers, and it's just talking about the multiplicity of, and you can see it's the same image, just repeated, but it's the multiplicity of the trees themselves, which the mangroves absorb more CO2 than the rainforest.
And here we've melded the ice cube tray with the mangroves because the ice cube tray is the icon of mitigation and the mangrove is a grand mitigator. It's also painted to make the ice cube tray reminiscent of the moon. So the ice cube tray is shining into the mangroves to say, this is a great mitigator.
So this is Aspiring Gulf, a 9-foot painting. It's called Aspiring Gulf Live Oak. And it's a map of Florida and the Gulf Stream and the Gulf of Mexico. You can see, if you can spot the map, you can then see New Orleans, you can go around Texas, and you can come up through the Yucatan to Cuba. And then the cutting into all that is the loop current from the Gulf Stream. And this is meant to be a number of things. It's really like 2 images on one, making one statement, but the oak is expanding beyond the border. Everything inside the border is localized. Everything outside the border is more global. So the Gulf Stream comes from outside the canvas. The trees go beyond the edge of the border. So it's kind of utopian image of wouldn't it be nice if the whole Gulf was surrounded by giant oak trees and to help calm and cool things down.
Like the painting Memory of Water, which we looked at, this is the way we want our world to be. Blue and cool and these beautiful trees, but it's not like that. And here we see the Gulf Stream, which brings warm waters up to the north and to northern countries. And we know scientists are suspicious that the Gulf Stream is slowing down. It's also discovering that with the melting of the ice in the north, in the Arctic, it's creating a cold region that may indeed cool the Gulf Stream in the north. And if that were to happen, they're not sure that it is, but there's some fear that would influence how other countries, including Canada and the north of the United States, how their weather and their environment is going to change. So we really, really, really have to be thinking about how we can be the change.
So we're stepping again. This is a 2008 painting called Currency, and it's now called Currency Climate Exchange. In 2008, it was just the spiral, the latitude and longitudes, the city names around the Gulf of Mexico. And it was really a painting about the dynamics of the Gulf and our surroundings. But we recently added the mitigator ice cube trays to the top and the mangrove mitigators at the bottom, sort of anchoring the painting. It's a 10-foot tall painting by 15 feet long. So it's pretty dominant. You stand there and it towers over you. And the dynamics of it, as we've said earlier, we explored the dynamics of the Gulf Stream coming in. It's possible that it's spewing out warm water eddies in the Gulf. It's possible that it's generating currents and movement within the Gulf that's affecting the wildlife in the Gulf. It's possible that it's depicting the atmosphere above as maybe a hurricane. So it is depicting aspects of the Gulf that have occurred since we originally painted this in 2008 and now have renovated it in 2021.
And as you see the spiral, it comes up to this place and then you go round and look, it comes almost to the same place. There's a spiral saying, basically, you can't step in the same place twice. You can get near it, but you can't do it the same way. This is very much about making art. Because when you make art, you revisit images, you revisit the things you've been thinking, but you're never in the same place. Life is like that too. You go home, you go to your families, you go to your jobs each day, but you're not the same person. You don't go to those things twice. So Heraclitus was really onto something. And here we go to another pre-Socratic philosopher, Thales, who was in the 6th century BC. Now, Thales was considered the first Western philosopher. And he's known for the saying, everything is water. So everything is water. He again wanted to find the basic stuff of the world. And if you think about it, water is pretty much a great guest. 70% of our world is covered with oceans and big bodies of water. Water comes from the sky. Water's a shape changer. It's gas, ice, and liquid. It also is something we have to have. We have to drink water. Plants need to drink water. All animals need to drink water. We need it to live. When we're born, mother's water breaks. Our bodies are mostly water. And you think of blood, it looks like red water. It's very, very smart. And as we said earlier, it helps to put communities and cities in their place. Water is essential to our world. So like sand through the hourglass, our time is running out.
So, expanding waters. Let's talk about water, a Florida Humanities Council series. And we want to thank the Florida Humanities Council for having this program with us.
And thank you for listening.
Well, and thank you so much, Carol and Robert, for I think that really fascinating conversation. So I'd love to be able to get into a few questions if we could. And I just wanted to remind our audience that if you have any questions or anything like that, you can add them into the chat or into the Q&A function. Rick Kilby has one right off the bat about the Expanding Waters exhibition and how much longer it's going to be available for people to potentially see it.
Well, I'll tell you, it just closed. And yes, it did. And it's going to be taken down this week. It was up since March, so it's been up a long time. And I wish that it could be up for months and months and months, and that all of you could come. But if you look at Creative Pinellas's Facebook page, they have all of the videos that we did, including walkthrough in the exhibition.
With curators.
With curators, and lots of all the science panels with artists. So you can see a lot of the show.
You can see all the dance, you can see the theater.
Right. That's all on there. And you can always contact us and come to our studio.
We have a fairly large studio here in Tarpon Springs, so anybody can contact us, and if they want to, we'll show them some of this stuff.
You can contact us at info@Mickett Stackhouse Studio. info@MickettStackhouse.com. You see how much I use that. And as Robert said, we live in Tarpon Springs and we live on a bayou. So we live on water. It's very important to us.
We're pretty much surrounded by water. Our neighbors across the street live on water.
Yeah.
So another question from Rick is if you could talk to us a little bit about the piece that's behind you.
Well, this is a piece called They're Here, A Cry for Help. And it's a big painting, 10 feet by 15 feet. And it's of a map of the Gulf of Mexico. And all of those rings in it, all of those ribbons, are all the water currents of the world. And so the idea is that there's no pure here, that our waters are influenced by waters from everywhere else. We certainly know that about hurricanes. Hurricanes start usually in Africa and come. We know as human beings, we don't live in isolation. We know in a collaborative team, although I think everything's here and he's there, he thinks he's here and I'm there. And then there's a giant tarpon jumping out of the water. So this was a painting we redid. Initially, the tarpon wasn't there, but in 2020, we added the tarpon, and the tarpon's jumping out because the waters are getting too warm.
That's another alarm. But an interesting thing about Carol said about the water too is when we were having that program with Jodica, the head of the Schmidt Ocean Institute, she was talking about, we were talking about the different oceans, and she said, well, you know, scientists don't really call it the different oceans anymore. They call it the ocean. The ocean. The ocean. So, you know, it's like water doesn't know when it's leaving the Gulf of Mexico and becoming the Caribbean, you know, so it moves around, it's in flux. It's sort of like the air above us. We don't name the air above us.
It's just the air.
Mm-hmm.
And so Marilyn has another question about whether you have any particular other projects that are coming up right now.
Yes, we do.
We do.
Yeah. So.
Well, there's one project that we really want to do, but we have not been given permission to talk about it. But
it would be very related to this show.
Yes.
Really, really related.
So stay tuned. But we have been approached by different people to think about doing a show. At this point, we haven't been working in our studio because we've been at Creative Pinellas almost every day doing some sort of panel. Well, we did most of them with Zoom, but so we're really interested about getting our work, some of our work back. We did sell some of our work from the studio. And of course you can always buy art, and you can go to Creative Pinellas /Expanding Water and see the art. But we're really itching to get back to work. And from what came out of this show, that's a real motivator for making new work.
So we are in talks with another museum about doing a large scale show like this. And as a matter of fact, there might be 2 different places we're doing it. We also really have talked with some people about the idea of traveling the concept of the show, having the large room, the large installation with the, you know, that sort of gives a statement about the state of our waters, or this, and then to travel it around and let it become more localized in other areas, other places, so that we have different ways of dealing with the water issues. Or, I mean, you can imagine this show out in California right now. I mean, what would be the issues? You know, so
or in different places in Florida.
Yeah. So we're interested in this as becoming more of a thing we would like to do, that has a lot of outreach in it, and bringing in localized talent and authorities and people like that on different subjects. So.
And we've spoken with the performers. They would really like to do this again because everyone worked so hard in what they were doing. And so we're really excited. This show has been a way of us putting together our 20-some years of collaboration and thinking about it, looking at it again, but also seeing how we can move forward.
Yeah, it's like telling our story, because a lot of situations are somebody might see a painting or 2 of ours in a show, or they might see a photograph of one of our sculptural installations, but they haven't really seen them all together or in a context where it represents what we've done for the last 20 years. And so as we told that story about the Richmond, Virginia, the founding of Richmond, Virginia, this show is sort of telling the story about the founding of our collaboration and how it went on.
Mm-hmm.
That's fantastic. And you mentioned that your show with Expanding Waters recently closed, and I think the nature of some of the other art that you've done, where I think there's been sort of limited access for people to potentially get to it. Or I think, Robert, you'd mentioned before that you might do a piece and you might not necessarily see it again. And so I wonder if there's some sort of do you experience anything really emotionally about that? Is it sort of I wonder if there's a grief process that you might go through in terms of all the time that you spend creating this art? Is there something that you wind up experiencing emotionally once you're separating away from that work?
Well, we've done this piece with the hanging paper 3 times, or not this same piece, but we've used that material and let it hang without touching the floor, so it moves by itself. We did one in New York City, we did one in Sarasota, and they were all very different, but they used that same material. And each time we had to destroy the material and destroy that piece in a way. But they always sort of get moved along, they get reborn in another form, another phase. I mean, you can't go back to it, is what we said in this whole talk. You can't step into the same art twice. But so it's, what we have as possessible things from these kind of shows are the paintings we do. And quite often they're of these sculptures.
When we were in Indianapolis, we were being interviewed on the radio, and we were at this station. It was a TV radio station. They had the TV on. And the Hurricane Charlie was approaching Florida. And at that moment, it was supposed to hit directly where we lived. We lived in St. Pete then on Tampa Bay. And it was supposed to come right in there. And I was like, what are we going to do? All the work is going to be destroyed. And Robert just looked at me and said, well, we'll make more. And that was really comforting. Yeah, indeed, we'll make more. So, and I keep that in mind when we leave a piece, a sculpture, or we let go and sell a piece of art. At first, I didn't like to sell anything. I just wanted to have it. But I love selling things now, because when people actually buy a piece of art, they cherish it. And to give your work a good home means a lot. And it was also interesting, at the moment I said that to Robert and he said, we'll make more, the hurricane shifted. I mean, it was like, and I don't even think St. Pete even got much rain from that, because it went up the middle of the state.
Well, we weren't here, and I heard it emptied out Tampa Bay.
Yeah, it did do that.
It sucked all the water out, but that was the only effect that I can remember anybody telling us about it. So in other words, what we're going to do, we're going to get our studio reset up. We're bringing in this large show back into our studio.
A lot of it.
Which is 2,000 square feet, which is a big studio with 20-foot ceiling. But we still have to have areas to work.
We have to put that ring someplace. The ring comes apart. We'll have it in half, and I think we can fit it over there. But you always have to figure these things out.
No, absolutely. And it sounds like in some way, one of the reasons why it's, when with Robert, what you said about how you'll just make more, it's really just loving that creative process. And I think as long as you're consistently able to create, I mean, you're always, those new challenges and things like that. That's probably the way that you can sort of address, any, I guess, anxiety that some people might have about letting something go, is that you're ultimately in love with the creative process, right?
Yeah. We're real process people. So we don't conceive of something beforehand and then make it. We really, we have some idea what we're going to do, but we allow the process to tell us which way to go.
And
When
so
we
is,
were, when
I'm
we
sorry,
were
go ahead.
those tall stones, the carver from Senegal kept saying to us, listen to the stone, listen to the stone. And he was actually right. And it's like when you're making art of any sort, listen to what you're doing.
Let alone the stone actually did sing to us as you were cutting it or doing whatever it was, especially just before the stone would break. There's photos of Carol breaking stone. You know, you put holes in the stone, then you put pins in it, you hit the pins, and it goes bong, 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 bing, 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 ding, 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 ding,
and then it breaks.
And then it breaks. You know, so it tells you it's going to do it. So a lot of our art does have sound elements to it. We've referenced it in, you know, River Song and Gateway Trio is, you know, those are music references in a way. And
Clear passage.
Clear, you know, so it encompasses more on different levels. And we've always wanted to do that. We've always had and enjoyed other people's interpretations. We did not say when we put the ice cube tray up next to the fire, water on fire, that it was a lifeboat. It took somebody who was not associated with art even to say that looks like a lifeboat.
And then someone else started singing the Mighty Mouse song.
Yeah, have no fear, because
the ice cube tray is here.
And somebody looked at the very last image we saw, the big spiral painting with, there was a map of the Gulf of Mexico, and it was just depicted by latitude and longitude and place names. You know, just St. Petersburg and New Orleans and Corpus Christi and Cancun and Havana. And they looked at that and they said, oh, I see. This is a warning about what happens when the water rises too much. So they saw that there was no land being depicted, therefore it was all water. So it was an interesting take that we didn't have. We didn't have that take. And so that kind of information is what you know, we get hungry for in a way. And now it becomes part of our whole criteria for doing this stuff.
And I think related to that ice cube tray, we do have a question that someone asked, and I think some of the paintings that you've done, if you could talk a little bit more about, I guess, the specific angle that you chose for that tray in terms of, is there any sort of meaning behind that, or the specific way that it was represented, or, you know, how did you come about in adding it in that way to some of the art that you
that it was sort of at an angle?
Yes.
Well, initially, we did it flat, and it was really boring, and it had no energy to it. When we tilted it, it was moving. It had action connected with it. So really, we discovered that in terms of making it. And what we wanted was an ice cube tray that was in action, because it's a mitigator. It's the symbol of action. And so, so it was about how images on paper, well, not paper, images on canvas and paper, we paint on paper too, how they react and present themselves.
Yeah. So yeah, it was a matter of really just sort of discovery, and you do it once and it's not quite working, you do it again, maybe it's working better, you do it a third time, it's even getting better. You know, that creates a body of work too. So, and
at one point the angle was too much, and so it's like, no, too much, you know, it looked weird.
That ice cube tray painting looks rather direct, you know, and I think that was the 7th one we did in order to get one that we liked, that we really wanted to have happen. And that's something about art studios that people don't quite get. We don't make masterpieces every time. Not to say that that's a masterpiece, but you know, you work up to them.
Yeah.
You know, and not all of them are are doing everything that you want it to do. And that's what the studio is all about. You're in there trying to pursue something, and you're making work. You're making a body of work while you're doing that. And
It's like
well, I was going to say, if you get stuck with it, I got to make it perfect on the first try, you're never going to get it done.
it's like a writer. You know, when you write, you know, the first thing you write isn't your final thing. It's just that when you write, especially now on the computer, you can go back and edit it pretty easily. It's hard when you're doing a 10-foot painting, or even that painting of the ice cube tray, which is about
2 feet.
2 feet. Still, to make a new one takes a lot of time. So in a way, it's editing. It's making it the way you want it to be, to present to the world as your vision.
And I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit too, if we could change gears just slightly. Some of the artists that might have inspired both of you in terms of going on this venture to create art. And I think it's kind of related to another question that Rick asked, which is if you're familiar with the artist Margaret Ross Tolbert out of Gainesville, if you've done anything with her, or if you've just sort of seen her work or anything like that. But you know, knowing her, but again, who are some of these artists that you know, contemporary or historical, that sort of inspire or inform the work that you do?
Yes, we do know her, not very well. She had a show a long time ago, actually in these galleries where Creative Pinellas is, but at that time it was the Gulf Coast Museum, and Ken Rollins was the director. And I actually called, we had an artist panel with artists that also do work about water and environment. And we had a long, wonderful conversation together, because I had invited her to be on the panel, but she was going to be out of town and she couldn't do it. She wanted to, but she couldn't. So yes, I think her work is very important in the way the work and her work in the environment. In terms of people who influenced me, I think in the visual arts, Louise Nevilson had always been sculptor, who had always been a hero of mine. She does those sort of assemblages. They're in every museum. But for me, women artists were very important, because to have successful women is a very good model to have. And she was like flamboyant. I saw her give a lecture once when I was an undergraduate, and she came flying in, and she had long eyelashes and was wonderfully dressed, and she had all these young men following her who were her assistants. And she, you know, that, not only her art, which I think is magnificent, just impressed me.
I think the artists that influenced me were 20th century artists. I don't.
All of them?
Yeah, most of them, yes. I didn't have anybody that I wanted, either that I aspired to be or work like, or, I mean, I can look at right now and I say, if we were to go to New York to the Modern right now, we would go right to Monet's water lilies. But that's only
which are on my shirt, actually.
Yeah, that's relative to the content of this show. Other words, in BC, before Carol, I did most of my work was about ships that are displaced. They were never in water. They were buried in the ground. They were, you know, in the air. They were all these kinds of things that were more like votive, ceremonial objects and things. And I made sculptures of that, and then I did paintings of those with some of the source material in it. But I think that what inspired me there was some of the boat builders who made dugout canoes and who made skin kayaks, and that was more of an influence to me. But not until I met Carol did I start working with water. So it was the missing ingredient, you know. So my influences were mid 20th century artists. I would say people like Rothko would be maybe one of the ones because of the way he layered paint. It was deep, and I worked watercolor that way. I always loved the idea of you could make a blue red, you could make an orange violet, and they're the kind of colors that if you mix them wrong, they just make mud. But if you do them right, they make this exquisite color that you don't really see anywhere. And I liked a lot of the colorists. I'm basically started out as a formalist. I mean, I was very minimal in my approach to making sculpture and art. So that those mid 20th century artists were very influential to me. So.
Very interesting. And I think for our last question for the evening, I want to try to ask something maybe just a little bit different than what I might ask people normally. And I wonder, you talked about Robert before Carol. And so the way that your art has sort of shifted after the two of you started collaborating together. In closing, I wonder if you could tell us about one of the first projects that the two of you worked on together, and what was that process like, and sort of what was that end result?
Well, I think we have two projects that we can talk about where we first worked together. And the first one is Carol had a radio program in Kansas City, Missouri called Art Radio. I was moving a bunch of art out to Kansas City because a collector there was collecting a large body of my work for his collection. And Carol heard that I was out there, and she asked me to be on the radio program. We spoke for an hour on that radio program. And I think that's where we found out that we sort of are different, but we have the same kind of set of goals in a way. I think the second project that really stands out is we were the designated artist for an international print symposium in Cortona, Italy. And we made a collaborative print there, got into some great Italian fights because we were early in our collaboration process. We have an assistant that says, when they said, what are they like when they're collaborating? And he would answer, I don't know, I always leave the room. So you start out off and then you start working together. But that particular project was really our first one. It was it's recorded in the University of Georgia's Georgia Review. We've got a page of how that how that print was constructed, and the dialogue around it, how it was of a sculpture we built in Georgia, but it was done in a way that was influenced by a Fra Angelico Annunciation painting in Cortona. So we called it the American print.
And it was a combination of the image and a poem that I wrote about building that sculpture, which I had a hand in building. And Robert actually worked on that poem as well. I had published poems before, so and it was called The Ode to the 2x4 because the sculpture was made out of 2x4s. But before that, and after the radio show, I was hired by your foundation to make a movie about you. And really, that's where it was called Robert Stackhouse, an artist at work. And that's where, for me, I discovered that we worked really well together. And of course, I learned a lot about him because I had to learn that to make this movie about him. And it won a prize. It was like, what, 10 minutes long, and captured your whole life.
My whole life story in 10 minutes. It's okay, I'm a minimalist.
So it was a gradual, I mean, we got to know each other professionally, and we discovered that we worked really well together.
I think that's fantastic. And I think that's a really great place to sort of leave our conversation for this evening. So Carol and Robert, thank you so much to the both of you for joining us for this part of the series. And thank you to all of our audience members who joined us as well. Again, you're going to receive a survey, so we'd appreciate it if you could take a few moments and fill that out for us. And hopefully we'll see you again for the next iteration of this series with Rick Kilby, who's going to talk about Florida's healing waters and some of the spiritual elements that have been associated with Florida's waters for quite some time. So again, thank you to everyone who joined us for our program this evening, and we look forward to seeing you all again soon.
And thank you.
And thank you very much. All right.
Thank you.
Art on.